Welcome to another episode of the Your Longevity Blueprint podcast. Today, my guest is Dr. Stephanie Venn-Watson, who is the CEO of Serafina Therapeutics. A seasoned veterinary epidemiologist and public health scientist, Stephanie previously served at the World Health Organization and U.S. Navy. With a lifelong mission of helping people and our fellow animals age better, Stephanie's award-winning approach to improving human and animal health has been featured on NPR, BBC, CBS, and National Geographic. In her time as CEO of Serafina Therapeutics, she's been recognized for the extensive research and education on pentadecanoic acid, hopefully I said that correctly, also known as C15, which we're going to talk about today. She also received her BS in Animal Physiology and Neuroscience from UC San Diego, DVM from Tufts University, MPH from Emory University, and was a National Research Council Associate with the Armed Forces Medical Intelligence Center. She's an Albert Schweitzer Fellow for Life. Don't know if I said that right, but that sounds fancy. So welcome to the show, Dr. Venn-Watson.
Dr. Gray, it's wonderful, wonderful to be here. It's great to be here, Stephanie.
So for my listeners, they know I previously had Dr. Paulman come on my show, and he shared how much he loves Fatty 15, which we're going to get to in a little bit here. Obviously, that's our topic today. But we recently started carrying this at our practice and online, and so I wanted to learn more myself about this molecule that you discovered and why it's so beneficial for aging. And so, as I ask of all my guests, I want to know your story, right? How you came to discover this. But I'll also say that I've seen your TED Talk, which is incredible.
Oh,
Congratulations on that. Yeah.
thank you. Thank you.
And you have a new book that's come out called The Longevity Nutrient. So we have to talk longevity. So before we get to fatty 15 and the C15 molecule, let's first talk about aging. So like, what's the point, right? So why do we want to live longer, or do we?
Yeah, I mean it's interesting because stuff like when we first were talking about the C15 evolving into the longevity nutrient as this more and more science came out, we did get to that core question, which is, do we want to live forever? And some assume, well, of course we do, but we were surprised when we have a decent cohort say, no thanks, like I'm not interested in living a long time. And I think it's because it's what a lot of us are experiencing with our parents or others, where it's like living longer without health is can be tough. And I think a lot of us think, I don't want that, but what everybody wants is to be able to
Health
live.
span. Yes,
Yes,
yes, yes.
exactly. So there's this wonderful world of, geroprotectors, that where these are molecules that help us slow the rate at which we age, slow the onset of the chronic diseases that kill us, that then help not only our health span, but can help our individual longevity too. So that's the world that we want to be in, that we're excited
Yes,
about,
yes.
right? And that we can all rally around that. And in the end, it's so that we could have more time to do the things we love. It's like life has this mean trick, right? Of when we're young, we're too busy
Mhm.
and we don't have time to go do all the things that we love. And then when we get older, we have time, but then we lose our physical
Mhm.
capabilities. And so it's just like, how can we even that playing field so that we just really have a full, wonderful, enjoyable life?
I've actually never heard of the word geroprotectors, and I did a gerontologic nurse practitioner program. So I find that interesting that I hadn't heard of that. I mean, you're introducing me to this. So now I want to know, what are the geroprotectors? Like, is
Right.
C15 a geroprotector?
It is.
Yeah, okay.
So yeah, and I was right with you, Stephanie. I was right with you with regard to not understanding, not knowing that was a new word for me. We work with Dr. Nicholas Shork. He's the head of the NIH's Longevity Consortium, and he's been so for 15 years. And so Nick came to us. We'll talk about the discovery with the
Mhm.
working with the dolphins, but it really fascinated him on how we came to discover C15 and this incredible, long-lived population with which we were helping. And so Nick taught us, he's like, listen, I've seen every longevity nutrient or every longevity molecule, rapamycin, metformin, under the sun. The holy grail is to have a geroprotector. And that's what I was like, well, I've never heard that word, what is it? And that's
Give
when
me
he
some of
explained.
that. Yeah.
Right, yeah, and that's what he explained. It's slow. There's evidence, he says it meets a lot of criteria, and there these kind of like these seven must-haves where it has to target the longevity regulating pathway. There needs to be evidence that targets hallmarks of aging, that you have clinically relevant benefits within weeks or months, and that there's evidence that you can there's evidence that you can slow the onset of these chronic diseases, and add on top of that, it has to be feasible to take over your lifetime and be
Sure.
safe. And he's
Sure.
like, if you have that, you have a geroprotector. So that's where Nick and I published a paper back in 2022, 2023 in Nutrients, really making the case of C15 as a leading
Sure.
geroprotector.
Yeah. Before we get to, again, the topic of the show, the C15, let me go back to what other geroprotectors are. You mentioned some of these. So can you mention like metformin? My listeners have heard about this. I haven't talked too much about rapamycin, but what are those?
Right.
And then we'll talk
So
about how C15 is better than those.
that sounds great. Currently the leaders are all drugs. So the prescription drugs, so they target specific mechanisms. So let's start with metformin. And when we talk about those longevity molecule must-haves, right, that or geroprotector must-haves, that metformin is something that we know targets the human longevity pathway, specifically the fancy mechanism within that, right, is it activates AMPK. And AMPK is it's how metformin works. It's why it's the first line drug treatment for type 2 diabetes is through this mechanism. It helps with glucose control and helping to ensure insulin sensitivity. And it's been relatively effective, and relatively safe over long periods of time compared to a lot of other drugs. It still comes with side effects. It still, has the limitations that come with prescription drugs, but it is promising with regard to a lot of the different boxes of being able to check. We know it targets hallmarks of aging. It helps with mitochondrial function. It helps with cellular signaling. So there are a lot of positive boxes to check with metformin. We're still, that the challenge with geroprotectors and longevity molecules is we don't have those studies, right? That you need to basically follow entire populations over their whole
Life,
lifetime,
yeah.
and they need to be healthy versus having diabetes and seeing if that helps them, right? Not get diabetes and move forward. And then rapamycin is probably the top contender. If you asked 10 longevity
Hmm.
scientists, what's the top one molecule up until now, of course, is, rapamycin would be at the top. And it also targets longevity pathway. It does what it calls, it inhibits a mechanism called mTOR. And the R and mTOR is actually the mechanistic target of rapamycin. That's how important rapamycin is in longevity. It got its own pathway named after what it targets. Rapamycin was initially discovered in Easter Island as a molecule that bacteria that were discovered on Easter Island were making. And they initially found that it had these great antifungal properties. And then since then, it's now been shown to be anti-fibrotic, so it can break down fibrotic tissue. It has anti-cancer properties. It's anti-inflammatory. So when we talk about, and then by inhibiting mTOR, some people might have heard, about these zombie cells
Hmm.
that happen when
Yeah.
we're aging. These right senescent cells that just won't die, so they just hang around and wreak havoc in our tissues. By inhibiting mTOR, that helps to clear out those zombie cells. So rapamycin is probably the favorite among most because it has this kind of wonky set of anti-cancer, antimicrobial, anti-inflammatory, antioxidant, anti-fibrotic properties. It ends up that C15 has all of those same properties too, and is safe. So if you go to Mayo Clinic site and you look up side effects of mTOR, I think the list has, I think it might have 300 side effects on it. So it is a hardy list that makes it difficult for people, is not meant for us to take long term safely. While we'll talk about C15 does all of these things, and it's what we were meant to have to help extend and to ensure our longevity safely. We'll talk about it comes from milk. And so it's what every mammal gets at birth. So a very safe molecule, yet with these really remarkable activities.
It's been a while since I've heard about rapamycin and where that was discovered. So thank you for the refresher. But tell me, so how are longevity molecules typically discovered?
Yeah, so most cases, probably 99.9% of the time, it's using short-lived species, right? So studies, because we just talked about, Stephanie, how you can't doing those long-term studies in humans just hasn't been feasible. But you could take mice, worms, or flies, and you could treat them with these different compounds and see if they live longer. And
Sure.
so that's right. So it's like it's the hunt for the holy grail of healthy aging and longevity has been mainly focused on screening molecules that kind of have these great mechanisms, and then using them in short-lived models to see, does it help them live longer, which is great. But they haven't really all panned out. We've had enough time pass that if it works, if it helps a mouse or it helps a worm live 2 weeks instead of one, which is doubling its lifespan, that doesn't necessarily
I mean, it doubles the
translate.
human, yeah, lifespan.
Yeah, and you see the high rate, the headline is molecule doubles lifespan, and then you realize. So we were given this, amazingly good fortune of being able to skip the line, right, and say and look at long-lived species, long-lived mammals, specifically dolphins, and understand that the secret to longevity has already been figured out by nature. Because how does a human, a dolphin, an elephant, which are mammals, how do they live 20 to 30 times longer than fellow mammals like a mouse? So it's really tapping into what has evolution enabled for this massive
Sure.
extension in longevity. Let's tap into that and then move forward from there.
Heck yeah. So speaking of hunting for these molecules, that's kind of what you did. So tell us about your discovery of
Yes.
C15 and how it emerged as this longevity nutrient, which again is your book. So
Right.
yeah.
Well, it was, to be totally honest, it was an accident. So some of the best discoveries, are accidental. So it wasn't like we went hunting for the leading longevity molecule at the time. I was, as you had mentioned, I'm a veterinary epidemiologist. I was working for the Navy, and really my core job for almost 20 years is caring for this population of Navy dolphins, that the
That
sustained
sounds pretty
population.
cool. Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome. And they live in the open ocean, go out to the open ocean every day. Every day they come back. I mean, it's really an incredible group of animals. Add on top of that it's in San Diego. Yeah, win-win, win-win. So came into basically understand they had accumulated over a half century of health data and archived serum and samples from the dolphins throughout their 30 to 50-year lives. In the wild, dolphins live to about 20. At the Navy, they're now living into their 50s. So as they had this growing geriatric dolphin population, we were able to watch over a 10-year period and publish all these papers. We were finding that older dolphins, that some, but not all, right? And that's critical. In the same population, some, but not all, were developing high cholesterol, chronic inflammation, fatty liver disease, the full suite of changes consistent with Alzheimer's. And so that allowed us, with this remarkable cleanliness of this population, to use an advanced technology called metabolomics, which had just been commercially available at the time. This was back in 2012, 2015. And we were able then to study thousands of small molecules present in the dolphins' archived serum, but also in their fish, to figure out in their fish diet, which small molecules predicted the healthiest aging dolphins. We we had a biased hypothesis, which is we figured, of course, it's omega 3s because they
Sure,
eat fish.
sure.
And we were proven wrong. It was for the dolphins, it was C15, a saturated fatty acid that I had never heard of it. It's been known since the 1950s, but it's been kind of written off as not relevant up until that dolphin discovery.
So you said there is archived blood of dolphins, like years of. So that makes me think, how do you draw blood on a dolphin? You bring it in, like,
Yeah, I mean, so dolphins are really good at masking illness, and unlike some patients who may be like
yeah.
we all chat with each other and share every single ache and pain, but dolphins, in order to help ensure their survival in the wild, it's to their benefit to mask illness as much as possible. So the way that the animals get their preventive care program is they're trained to routinely provide blood samples. So they'll just stick their fluke out of the water,
Oh
which has
my
a
gosh.
gorgeous, yeah, it has
Yeah,
a gorgeous vein on the back, and they are able to easily draw blood from
that's
that tail.
incredible. Yeah, yeah.
And they'll do it as rarely as once a quarter and as often as once a month, and they'll run that typical CBC and chem profile, 44 different clinical indices on every animal throughout their entire life, so that they can catch, if there's anything popping up, they're going to catch it in that blood work.
Wow. So you figured if a dolphin has high cholesterol, that's just like nuts. Okay, so so you went back through the archived research to see what was predictive of the healthiest dolphins. And you
Yeah,
found, right? Am I hearing you right? And you
yeah,
found this C15 molecule, which most people have never heard of.
yeah.
But you just kind of alluded to the fact that it's a saturated fatty acid. So tell us more. What is this C15 thing?
Right. So it's C15 is characterized as, so first it's a fatty acid, right? But it's an odd chain saturated fat. So we're
And why
used to
is that
pretty
important? Because again, my listeners are going to go,
exactly.
what the heck is an odd chain?
Yeah,
Like, explain that too.
that's right. And this is really, really important. It's good you called this out. So we now know, so for a long time, we have put all saturated fats into one bucket and we've called them all bad, right? And so what we now know definitively, this is not just us, this is hundreds of papers now have shown that there are two types of saturated fatty acids categories: odd chain and even chain. An odd chain is based on the number of carbons in its chain. So C15 has 15 carbons. It's an odd
Odd
number.
number. Okay.
There you go. And then even chain saturated fats like C16, C18, those are its own class. And so we now know that even chain saturated fats, one, they're present at much, much higher levels in the foods that we eat, like 40 times higher of pro-inflammatory fats and dairy fat
Okay.
and meat fat compared to C15. And these even chain saturated fatty acids are pro-inflammatory. So it's not that the world was wrong. It's just they put everything, they inappropriately bundled
Mhm.
these even and odd. And what we've learned is that not only is C15 the Goldilocks odd chain saturated fat that's anti-inflammatory, that protects our cell membranes, that all the various things we'll talk about that led to it being the leading longevity nutrient. Not only is it beneficial, but we published in 2020 that it's the first essential fatty acid to be discovered in over 90 years. And that's now been validated by 4 independent teams globally as meeting these really rare criteria of being an essential fatty acid.
Which I want to break that down too. So essential means you need it and you don't
Yeah.
make it. Is that
That's
correct?
right. So
Okay. Okay.
that's right. So you need it and you don't make enough of it. So you might have some levels in your body. There's evidence that our microbiome can actually help make some C15. So it helps feed in again, yet another reason why our microbiome is having a healthy one is so important. But it is very clear that we have to get certain amounts of C15 from our food, from our diet or supplements, in order to achieve levels in our body that help us just maintain baseline health. And in the absence of it, we actually develop a nutritional deficiency syndrome, which we published last year, similar to like vitamin C and scurvy and vitamin D and rickets. We've identified a deficiency syndrome caused by too little C15 in the diet.
You're reading my mind because these are the next questions I've written down, and you're already. But I want to go back to the dolphins. So,
Yeah.
so the dolphins. Did you get to interact with these dolphins too?
A little
A little
bit.
bit. Okay.
So yeah, some folks know, you probably also saw the TED Talk. I don't know how to swim and I'm terrified of water. So
I
it was,
I didn't know if you were joking. You literally don't know how to swim. You did say that, but okay, okay.
yeah, I know.
So you didn't get
So
too close, is what you're saying.
yeah, so I was the nerd that was like right there, right where the dolphins
It's never
were.
too late. Let me tell you, it's never too late to learn how to
Okay.
swim.
I'll almost, when we're talking about the point of longevity, right? To
If you're
challenge
gonna live
ourselves.
forever, you better learn how to swim. No, just kidding. So-
Good
okay,
point.
so you didn't get to interact that much with them, but you got to see them. And so, could you tell? You said dolphins are good at masking illness, but could you kind of tell healthy dolphins from unhealthy dolphins, or really not without the biometrics?
It's
Without
really
the
Yeah, it's really subtle signs that their human counterparts, with which they worked at the Navy, could pick up on. But it would be they were so smart, the Navy, in which they monitor every day's diet that is fed to every dolphin. And if they don't eat their full meal, like let's say they pass on some of their fish,
yeah,
that gets marked down as, oh, not as hungry today, and
yeah, yeah,
lack
yeah,
of hunger could be a sign. So then
yeah.
blood gets drawn, and things like that. Or sometimes they'll swim deeper in the water if they're not feeling well. So there are little signs you
Hmm.
could pick up on, but that all leads to go grabbing that blood work and being
Yeah,
able to
yeah.
pick up on things.
So the dolphins that, not just the dolphins that lived longer, the ones who had the better, again, like blood work, we'll say, were the ones who had, you're essentially saying, higher amounts of C15 in their blood.
That's right.
So how high levels, so how does that translate into humans? Like, how do we know what levels we want and how do we measure those levels?
Right. So it ends up remarkably, it's the same. So whether you're a dolphin, or which that surprised me, right? Because dolphins actually get a lot more C15 in their diet than we do.
Well, they eat fish, right? I mean, we're not, I'm in Iowa. We don't have access to fresh fish, so we're not eating fish
That's
often.
right. That's right. So they so yet when you get down to the red blood cell, like one of the critical roles of C15 is, it's an anti-inflammatory saturated fatty acid, and it has no double bonds in its structure, which means it is protected against oxidative damage. So a lot of fatty acids, so anything that's unsaturated, has double bonds in its structure. And those double bonds make it flexible, which is great, but it's also a reason why they're oils at room temperature, and that those double bonds are super susceptible to attack by oxygen, leading to lipid peroxidation and
Sure.
all these negative effects that come with aging. So when we got down to what levels do we need, both whether you're a dolphin or a human, that you need about 5 micrograms per mil of C15 in your cell membrane and in your blood to be able to maintain that stability of the cell, to be able to target these target AMPK, activate AMPK, inhibit mTOR, which C15 also does. So it and then what's wonderful is that all of that became very consistent with when we were looking at mechanisms of C15 in the lab. It was those same levels that you needed. So, and it's all achievable through relatively small amounts, 100 to 200 milligrams per day,
Which we
which
get from what foods? I mean, we don't, again, you probably from fish, but we're not dolphins, so we're not eating a lot of fish. So what are the other food sources? And obviously,
yes.
listeners, you can read her book to get the long version of this, but what's the condensed version? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So for us humans, our primary source of C15 by far is dairy fat. So that now we're getting closer to home, right?
Sure,
So
sure.
so we know that in fact C15 for a long time has been used in studies as a biomarker of how much dairy fat people eat. That's how reliable it is as a source of most of our C15 levels. If you're from Eastern countries, it's probably more likely fish, because
Sure.
if it's in the heads and skin of fish. But for the Western countries, it's dairy fat. And if you think about what's happened since 1977,
Hmm.
right? We were all told go off of whole fat dairy, stop
Yep.
drinking it, don't eat butter. And those were our primary sources of C15. And that's
Yeah.
resulted in declining C15 levels over time and, evidence of accelerated aging as we've developed these C15 deficiencies.
Interesting. Yeah, I swear, as you were mentioning that, I was like, I swear I had a table or something, a timeline from you guys that was kind of going through when Congress had recommended we reduce our saturated fats and whatnot. And I know what the listeners are thinking. They're thinking, you tell me not to have dairy on the show
Yeah,
because from a hormone optimization standpoint, dairy can be very inflammatory and it can raise estrogen and it can cause bad things to happen. So, listeners, we have a solution. You don't have to up your dairy, although there are some higher quality dairy options. But what if my listeners don't want to consume more fatty dairy? Gosh, I want to ask you like five questions at once, but I guess I'll stick stay in
great.
line. What is our other option? What's the
Yeah. So,
solution? Yeah.
so that's where the Navy came in, right? So the Navy saw that, as we were, and all of the studies that I am sharing, Stephanie, all of these are, Navy funded studies. And so all of this work, and it's all been wonderfully to help the Navy dolphins. But what was happening is they were having a harder and harder time finding fish that had enough fat, specifically C15 in it, to maintain these baseline levels. So, which is a
Hmm.
little bit sad because
That's a
we
whole
can't
nother story and question. Like, yeah,
know.
yeah.
So it's
Oh,
like the
yeah.
poor wild dolphins, are we can't help there, but we can help the Navy dolphins. So they're actually getting fatty 15 supplementation in order to get their C15 levels up. And so the Navy funded the development of a pure free fatty acid C15 supplement to help solve that problem. Wonderfully, it also solves a big problem for us,
For
which is what,
humans, yeah.
yeah, which you've gotten to, which is when, again, only 1% of milk fat is contains C15. Over 40% of milk fat are these pro-inflammatory, even chain, right, and
Yeah, thank you
other
for
fatty
breaking that down.
acids.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so it's hard. What we've learned is that, studies have shown that, like, for example, Bishop et al. Did a study where they gave a mouse model of type 2 diabetes and fatty liver disease. They gave it C15, C17, and then milk fat. And what they showed was that they repeated what we showed, which is C15 lowers glucose, lowers inflammation, specifically like IL-6 and TNF, all of these pro-inflammatory
Inflammatory, yeah.
cytokines. Yeah, exactly. Helped to lower the weight gain on the high fat diet, like, these, and helps to lower lipid deposition, lipid peroxidation in the liver. When they looked at and improved glucose control, when they looked at C17, it helped to lower some of the inflammation, but it didn't have the breadth and the depth of the effects of C15. And then when they looked at the group where they gave milk fat, they got worse. So just like you said, increased inflammation in the liver.
Yeah, yeah.
So milk fat, for all the reasons that you had just stated, you have not been wrong, that as adults, and post-adolescent, humans, you don't see any other mammal continuing to eat dairy
Right, right.
after it's gone through that primary phase. So the Navy really said, hey, how do we leverage the power of C15 and all of its benefits without having it compete with all of these pro-inflammatory fats? And that's why we have that led to the creation of fatty 15, which is a pure free fatty acid supplement, C15 supplement, that is 100% bioavailable, as shown by extensive human clinical trials. So we know that what you're eating through the supplement, you're getting into your system, which is rare, right? Not a common effect.
Amazing, amazing. Okay. I'm gonna go back in time because you packed so many nuggets in there. I want to break down a little bit of like what you said. So I was gonna ask, why do we humans need C15? But it's for the same reason that the dolphins needed it. Like it sounds like it just prevents chronic disease. So can we go back to the longevity molecules and how this is better than
Yeah.
the rapamycin and the metformin? Like again, and I'm sorry if I'm asking you to repeat yourself, but what all pathways is this helping? Like,
Yeah.
why is this so much better? Like, why do we really need this?
So when we go through those like kind of must-haves of a
Yeah.
geroprotector, right? Like how does C15 do? So we know that it targets the longevity pathway. It's targeting both what metformin and
And
rapamycin do, right? So it
but
has
it's not a drug without the side effects. Is that
you,
okay? Okay.
see, you're already knocking it out of the park. So right, so it activates AMPK and it inhibits mTOR. Both are known mechanisms to extend, and support healthy longevity.
Okay.
So the fact it does both, which is great. It targets key hallmarks of aging, and these are right cell-based mechanisms of aging. And if we can target aging at the cellular level, that has, right, obviously body and mind wide impacts on our longevity. So we know that it now targets multiple studies showing it targets 6 different hallmarks of aging, which is a good number, right? So it helps
Sure.
repair mitochondrial function. It helps with cellular signaling. So not only does it helps with AMPK and mTOR, but some other like fun acronyms is it inhibits JAK-STAT, which is my favorite because that's involved in like autoimmune diseases and inflammatory responses. That's a big benefit I personally have felt. And it also activates these things called PPARs, which are orchestrators of our metabolism and immunity. So it does some really heavy lifting. But anyway, I won't go through the whole list because
No,
it's
that's
in
good. Thank
the
you for
book.
expanding on that. Yeah. And then on the flip side, what does C15 deficiency look like? So I think you mentioned this cellular fragility syndrome,
Yeah.
right? Which is essentially nutritional C15 deficiency. So what does that look like? So if it's the opposite of health and longevity, then it's early death and chronic disease, or like, or what? Can you expand on that?
Yeah, unfortunately, the
Yeah.
answer is yes. So one of the core mechanisms, right, of C15 is it's a stable fatty acid. So in addition to all what we just talked about, right, and I touched on, is that it stabilizes our cell membrane. So every one of our cells is protected by a cell membrane. That cell membrane is made out of fatty acids and lipids
Mhm.
because C15 is a stable fatty acid that resists this attack by oxygen. It literally protects our cells, it armors our cells against premature breakdown or aging related breakdown.
Yeah, having you said that, I'm remembering that's what Mark Hyman had said. I think he called this the armor. What do you call it? Armor for your cells. Yeah,
Yeah,
everybody knows who he
yeah,
is. Yeah, but yes, okay, continue.
that's great. We were just with him yesterday. So which
Amazing.
is
Yeah.
great. So yeah, so by armoring our cells, then we know we need a certain amount of C15 in our cells, in our bodies, in order to serve that core cell protecting function. What we now know is that when our C15 levels get low, and so it's this deficiency level, which is less than 0.2% of total fatty acids. There are three ways to measure it, but we have
Was
definitions
my
for all.
next question. Okay, but continue.
Yeah. Then our cells get fragile and they undergo a process called ferroptosis. And so, what we didn't know, Stephanie, at the time, while we were understanding this syndrome that was happening in some dolphins that were getting a C15 deficient diet by accident, right? Because the fish, that in 2012, the same year we published this syndrome in dolphins, uh, there were scientists at the University of Columbia or Columbia University who discovered an entirely new way that our cells were dying called ferroptosis. And we learn apoptosis, necrosis, and autophagy in school. They discovered a fourth way that our cells were dying. And since then there have been over 10,000 papers on ferroptosis of it's describing it's accelerating our aging, it's exacerbating the onset and aggressiveness of exactly like you said, type 2 of the chronic diseases, type 2 diabetes, heart disease, cancer, neurodegenerative diseases. But nobody has understood where did it come from. All of a sudden it shows up out of nowhere. What we've been able to show is that C15 deficiency causes ferroptosis, which, going just one nerdy level deeper, and then I'll hold at that the cell ferroptosis is described as our cell walls becoming fragile because of fragile fatty acids. They then get attacked by oxygen, increasing lipid peroxidation. And then there's this mysterious iron that was present, free iron present in the cell. And when you combine free iron with this lipid peroxidation, you have this massive production of reactive oxygen species that
Bad
then
things
take out
happen. Yeah.
bad things happen. Take out the bad things, you die. So nobody understood how this happened. We have been able to show this exact pathophysiology, this exact process where red blood cells become fragile as part of the process. They get engulfed by the liver. Lots of dead red blood cells in the liver results in iron overload. You start seeing patients with hyperferritinemia of evidence of iron overload in their tissues.
Yeah.
Ferroptosis happens, it spills over, and now we're exactly like you're saying, we're accelerating aging and the onset of chronic diseases in younger and younger people. And so it's a lot of urgency behind getting the science out there so we can have these discussions. And the good thing about nutritional deficiencies is that they're fixable.
Fixable. Sure. So you don't want to be low. And I guess the
Yeah.
question is, I know you've mentioned like the levels, like what you want to be higher than, but how do we know? Because each of our individual levels might vary based on our diet intake of C15, right? So like, are there companies like Genova who, I mean, we run fatty acid testing through, like who are testing for C15
They
now?
are.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
they
Okay.
are. So you could go to the NutriVal and Genova, and they've been including C15. And so you can even go back and maybe look at some of your patients
Yeah.
and catch
Yeah.
those C15 levels.
I mean, I
They
look at those
also,
every day on patients. So it's the
oh,
pentadecanoic acid basically
yeah,
that I need to look
that's it.
for. Okay. Okay.
That's right. And we also worked with them to develop a blood spot test. So if people wanted to have that, sent to their house, they
Yeah.
can get the blood spot test. And so what they'll show is that 0.2%, which is the threshold for deficiency syndrome, is in the middle. And that is because as a society, we've all
Oh, well.
drastically decreased. So what's normal is
It's
not
shifted.
healthy.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
It's
Yeah. Yeah.
shifted.
So you got
So
to be high end. You got to be high end. You really,
yeah, yeah. And so the way we kind of describe it is 0.2% is like standing on the edge of a cliff. And if you were any lower, your cells are going to become fragile, start falling apart. So
you
instead of
don't want
being
to
right on,
just be on the edge. Yeah.
yeah, let's give
Yeah.
ourselves
Yeah. Yeah.
some
Some
room.
cushion here. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And so like I'm at 0.46%. If you look at people in Sardinia, in the high
Yeah. Yeah.
longevity
Yeah.
zones, right where they live longer, they're at 0.6%. So, there's, like you said, there's a
Yeah.
lot of room to
Yeah.
actually get higher to live, to do even better than where
Right.
we've been at for a long time.
And I've already said on the flip side once the show, but on the flip side, I just had a baby and I'm finishing breastfeeding. And so like I'm so curious, like, okay, what were my levels? Because obviously I'm passing that down onto him. So could even optimal aging, we know optimal aging starts in the womb, right? And this is a longevity podcast. I mentioned that before, but then I'm curiously thinking, okay, so if had I, which I wasn't necessarily taking it, but I'm gonna go back and look at what my levels were on my Nutriment. Had I been giving him more C15, is that setting him up? I mean, in theory, of course, it'd be setting him up for success his whole life, right? Because it starts with, yes, what we're feeding our children at a young age. So, yeah, now I'm thinking all kinds of things. So
Yeah, there's
that answers the level question. So thank
yeah,
you.
you're welcome. And there's actually been a fascinating, very exciting growth of studies focusing on exactly that, Stephanie, of looking at infants, mothers and pregnant mothers and infants, and studies repeatedly showing that moms who have higher C15 levels, just like you said,
Yeah.
result in higher C15 levels in the fetus and in the
Breast
babies.
milk and yeah, or
Yeah, through breast
yeah,
milk,
yeah, yeah.
exactly. And the higher mom C15 is, the better the body growth, the better the brain development, and the better the cognitive abilities, all the way up to studies that have been following kids up to 6 years old. So
Yeah, that's
it's like,
amazing. Yeah.
how do we get making sure we get that again from the longevity from the
From the
very
very
beginning?
beginning. Yep. And I will say, so I learned about, well, I had heard about you or you, C15 and Fatty 15 earlier on, but then at A4M this year, that was like my first purchase and I did start taking it. So my son had been getting breast milk for the last 6 weeks, with with C15 in it for sure. Now I lost my train of thought. Oh, but you were just saying, of course, that fatty acids, essential fatty acids are important for a developing, well, fetus and for a brain, but that made me think, okay, but again, we talk about essential fatty acids on this different essential fatty acids on this podcast. So now my listeners are going to think, what's the difference between, the C15 and other omegas? Because as I understand, again, C15 actually is outperforming other omega-3 like fatty acids. So I'm going to have you break that down a little bit as well. And when we say outperform, like we're talking in labs too, right? Like lowering cholesterol, glucose, I mean, all the above. Like
Yeah,
it's
it's
just hard
it's
to believe because I love omega-3s. I've taken them literally my whole life as well, but C15 is better. So tell us the difference and why.
right. I'm gonna give some breathing room here, right? So because
Okay.
so with regard to essential fatty acids, like you said, they're essential and they meet the same criteria as vitamins, right? And so it's like we discovered vitamin E, we wouldn't say don't take
Take
vitamin
vitamin
A.
E. Right.
Right, yeah,
Right.
yeah, that it would be like that. So C15,
Is
newly discovered.
one.
Yeah, we
One.
need to have it. So, but having our omega-3s, we have linoleic acid, which is omega-6, which was the first essential fatty acid. We actually have no problems getting that in our diet. So there isn't really a need to supplement omega-6s, as most people understand. In fact, we run the risk of having too much, and then it becomes pro-inflammatory. So then that gets us to the omega-3, which is alpha linolenic acid, which is the precursor to EPA, DHA, the omega-3s that we've all come to love. The best way to get, and so because they're polyunsaturated fatty acids, they're almost like a yin and yang role with C15. So their omega-3s provide flexibility to the cell membrane. C15 provides stability and resilience. So they are all important,
Beneficial. Yeah, and important. Yeah.
beneficial.
Okay.
And so that's good. So you haven't been wrong. The challenge comes more from what our source of omega-3s are. So if we get it from from our diet, from our fish, for example, then that's probably, or your food, that's probably the best source of omega-3s. When we get to the supplements, you've got like a 50-50 chance because again, they're molecules that have lots of double bonds. So they're susceptible to being attacked by oxygen, not just in our body, but in the bottles. And so pretty consistently, about 50% of omega-3 supplements on the shelf, and it doesn't even matter by price or expiration date, have levels of lipid peroxidation that go beyond kind of the international voluntary, level that the community would like to see it at. And if it has lipid peroxidation, it means you're getting less omega-3 effective essential fatty acids than what you're buying for in that bottle. So we're just trying to raise the bar to say like, hey, can we, we could have taken butter, put it in a capsule and called it a C15 supplement. Just like you could take fish oil, put it in a capsule, call it an omega-3, but we didn't. We said, let's find a way to provide just the pure free fat, pure essential fatty acid on its own. Proof of how that could work in the omega-3 world is Vasepa, where that has been shown it's a relatively pure EPA omega-3, and clinical trials, even though there's some question about it, pretty much are positive, showing that it can help decrease the risk of heart disease. So I think there's a way there.
Yeah.
When we then compare pure C15 against pure EPA across multiple cell systems, mimicking various human cell systems, mimicking various disease states, we showed that that C15 had 3 times, really 5 times more benefits, beneficial, clinically relevant beneficial activities compared to
Mm.
even pure omega-3. So there's a world that they should all get along. And it's not the manufacturer's fault. It's just that the omega-3 molecules are just really fragile once they hit the environment.
Well, sometimes I do think it's the manufacturer's fault though, because there are very cheap fish oils out there. I talk a lot about because we carry our Longevity Blueprint brand, right, has a fish oil that has the shortest seed to shelf time in the industry. So
Perfect.
the seed to shelf time is crucial because a lot of fish oil products, by the time the fish is well, killed, right? And then the oil is harvested and that gets packaged and processed and actually to your retail chain store or whatnot. And then you get it home. It's been like 2 to 3 years. And yes, that oil is old, rancid, oxidized, unstable, inflammatory, like tastes bad. You burp it, it's bad for you. So you do want to make sure you're getting a high quality omega-3,
Yes.
which I believe what we carry is very high quality and has very short sea to shelf life. And there are some things in there to ensure freshness and stability and less oxidation. So
Yeah,
yes, so I think you can have both. You can get a
that's
high
right.
quality omega-3 and high quality or a good C15. Yeah, man, you trigger all these questions in my head and then I go one direction and I forget.
It's great. No, that's how it's meant to go. There's a lot. There's a lot, right? A lot there.
But I guess I can just kind of bring it back to let's see. So society, I kind of feel like also talking about, oh, is it the manufacturer's fault? Well, sometimes. Well, I also feel like it's kind of society's fault that we're so low on the C15, but there are things we can do. So we can take this supplement. And I remember what I was going to say. Okay, so I was going to say, if we know this is going to help our biomarkers like better than omega-3s, like I haven't tried this on clients yet, but I will. So like for reducing cholesterol, like patients are, I'm assuming, or providers have used this on their clients, right? So someone has a high triglycerides, high cholesterol, they take C15, retest in 3 months, and we're seeing markers go down, like more significantly even than with an omega-3. I mean, that's essentially what you're saying. I got to see this in action with my patients, but that's essentially what you're saying should
Yeah,
happen, right? Of course, it's probably dose dependent too, because some people may need more than others. And
that's right. That's
yeah,
right. And there hasn't been, just to be super clear, there haven't been like a head-to-head studies of
sure,
omega-3 versus
sure,
C15, but
sure.
there have been clinical trials with C15 supplementation and specifically, the pure C15 ingredient, fatty 15 or fatty 15 itself. And both of these clinical trials focused on people with fatty liver disease, in part because one of our leading hypotheses that I cover in the book is that, fatty liver disease, non-alcoholic form or masled, or, it's going
Yeah, yeah,
through a
yeah, yeah,
whole
yeah, yeah.
rebranding that didn't, the first 20 reports were by Mayo Clinic in 1980. Today, 38% of people globally have fatty liver disease. So and it's kind of with the ferroptosis story, what caused this alarming rise in fatty liver disease? What we've been able to show both in the dolphins and now in people, that C15, that fatty liver disease is, at least a phenotype of it, is a component of nutritional C15 deficiency syndrome.
That can
So
be reversed with
that can be
Okay,
reversed.
okay, okay.
So, and that's where, Dr. Jeff Schwimmer, he is a leading pediatric gastroenterologist. He's one of the leading physicians or researchers in fatty liver disease for kids. He opened the first fatty liver disease clinics for kids in the world. And Jeff reached out to me back in 2012 when we published that dolphins were getting fatty liver disease. And he's like, I don't get it because they
They
don't eat
eat.
sugar.
Right, 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 right. They're eating
Right.
healthy fats.
Like,
Yeah, yeah,
like,
yeah, yeah.
like this isn't, we're pursuing trans fats and
Yeah.
sugar. And then he found that the dolphins, if you look at the livers under the slide, liver tissues, they look exactly the same. It's the exact same disease that's happening in dolphins and in his kids and in people. So then Jeff did a study in which he looked at 237 kids and measured the amount of fat in their liver, and he showed that there was a correlation, a linear correlation between higher C15 and lower fat in the liver. So then he's like, okay. So then what he did was he did a randomized placebo-controlled clinical trial in which he gave young adults, 18 to 24-year-old, that have a history of fatty liver disease, gave them fatty 15 for 12 weeks. And he showed first 2 out of 3 of the participants in the study had what we define as C15 deficiency. So 2/3
Mhm.
had low C15
Pretty
levels.
compelling. Yeah, yeah,
Pretty good.
yeah.
And
Hmm.
then of the ones that took fatty 15 and got above and beyond that threshold of deficiency, they had statistically significantly decreases in their ALT and AST, in their liver enzyme levels, which was the biggest problem they had at the
Mm.
beginning of the study. So it also showed that their red blood cell health improved as well, kind of getting back to that whole,
Yeah.
improving cells health. And then there was a second study in Singapore that did C15 supplementation as well in adult women with fatty liver disease and showed that these women had lower LDL cholesterol, getting to the cholesterol component, and improved growth of Bifidobacterium adolescentis, of this healthy microbe in their gut. So we're just all within 12 weeks. So we're still, we're just starting to learn relatively near-term clinically relevant benefits that C15 can have, in a sizable population, how we can help people in the near term as well as in the long term.
Amazing, incredible. Okay, so you've convinced us all that we need C15, which we can get in fatty 15 supplement. Let me
That's
ask
right.
about tolerability and side effects, right? As we talked
Right.
about of the other, what was that word? Geroprotectors, right? Some of those
Yeah.
has side effects. So what about this geroprotector? What do you feel like the tolerability is?
Yeah, it's a very high tolerability. So in both of those clinical trials, the side effects that were reported were equal among the controls and the people who got fatty 15. So they both reported. That's always interesting to me, right? Because you talk about the placebo effect, and it's not just for benefits; it's also for
Or side effects?
this is giving me a headache, and it's
Yeah.
like, well, it's rice
It's
flour, so but it's important to keep in mind. So there were no side effects that were attributed to the supplementation in either clinical trial. NIH actually has a program called the NIH Tox 21 program. C15 was part of that program, in which it underwent over 400 safety tests, and it passed all of them. We've been able to show, and in part because of that, and through extensive safety studies, we were able to get a generally recognized as safe or GRAS
yeah.
status for C15, which you don't need to do for a supplement. You do it as an ingredient, but we wanted to do it
Mm-hmm.
anyway. So very safe. And it makes sense since every mammal gets C15 at birth, and we're giving it at levels that, again, are not like these extraordinarily high. This is what we are supposed to get, but how can we optimize those levels and give C15 really a good ability to go, do what it does and do it well.
Wonderful. Okay, so let's transition to fatty 15 itself. So the supplement. So what is it made out of? So it's not dairy, right? And it's not
Right.
fish. So what is fatty 15? Where are you getting the source of C15?
Right. So when we saw its promise with regard to fatty liver disease and anemia, we were actually developing it as a pharmaceutical. And so our route, again, funded by the Navy, was to develop a therapeutic intervention. And in order to do that, you have to, it's very strict guidelines on how to develop a pharma grade ingredient that, at every batch is made through very high quality standards, and each and every batch is tested to meet those standards. Even though we transitioned and moved this pure C15 ingredient for it as a supplement and ingredient, we held to those same standards. So the way we were able to make it pure and vegan friendly, because we're like, well, we might as well make it vegan friendly
Mm-hmm.
while we're at it. So we take pure C14, which is readily available in plants, and we add a carbon onto it. And it's a very simple molecule, so it's bioidentical. There are no differences between the C15 and the C15 in nature, with the exception of it's a free fatty acid. So it's already bioavailable and ready to go. So that's how we make it. And we
So is it from
decided,
coconut? Is it from coconut or what is
yeah,
it? Okay, okay.
it can come from, so C14, the most common sources are coconut and nutmeg. So those are where most of the
Yeah.
C14 is from, but it's obviously has none of the allergens, or it's literally that
Just
14 carbon chain.
so if someone has a coconut allergy, you're saying they can probably take this. That's what you're saying. Or
Yeah, I can prove it because
okay, okay, okay.
I'm allergic to coconut, and
And
so yeah,
okay.
and I
Okay.
yeah, able to take it.
Awesome, awesome. Okay. Anything else you want to share about your mission to restore C15 levels and help slow aging? Like, what are you doing now? So this all sounds amazing. This is what you've been working on. You have this book that's come out. Like, what now? So what's next?
Great. So yeah, it's what's exciting, Stephanie, is that we started this this exciting adventure through an accidental finding helping
Yeah.
dolphins, right? And in a very quick time, it's been 20 years, but it feels quick. But in over a 20-year period, it's now grown, and especially in the last 5-10 years, the world has now picked up on C15 and is now working with it. So we now have, there are now over 100 peer-reviewed scientific papers showing the benefits of C15 and and it's by teams throughout the world who have nothing to do with us, right? It's just the excitement is really palpable because other people are showing, oh, it does meet the criteria of essentiality. It is helping with these longevity pathways. And so all those studies are at Discover C15 as in C15.com. And so we just continue to put the latest literature
Yeah.
on there, which is great. And so we are now also excitedly looking at, in addition to others working on infant health, which I think is a really
Yeah.
exciting
Yeah.
field, infant formulas and things like that, of looking at cognitive and brain health. So it's kind of an untapped frontier for C15. And so we have done some early studies. Stay tuned
No, you
because we
got me.
always,
Yeah, you got me thinking because I want to give C15 to my kids. But
yeah.
is it for adults? I haven't even looked at the label. What does the label say? I mean,
It's so when we went through that GRAS status,
yeah,
right? So
yeah, yeah.
it's for 4-year-olds and up. Uh,
Okay.
yeah, and so now we're working on basically that same process of extensive deep dive and safety studies and all of those things for for the younger ones, and it's also been deemed safe for pregnant women, for mothers
Yeah.
who are nursing, so we can at least get that start
Yes,
there
yes,
and then
yes.
fill in this gap of our neonate to that 4-year-old.
So if you have a 6-year-old like myself, no, who doesn't want to swallow a capsule, they're very small. I mean, these are easy to swallow. These are great. But can we open up the powder? Is it stable and just sprinkle it in yogurt? Just kidding, not dairy, but sprinkle it on something.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. Yeah, I do. I actually I melt it in my coffee in the morning,
Okay.
and
Okay.
so yeah, you
And you're
can you
probably
can.
taking like 3 a day, aren't you? How many do you take?
No,
No.
it goes in between. I kind of I watch my levels,
Yeah.
and so I'll take 1 to 2 a day.
Yeah.
And so, but it's more like for periods, like really for the first year and a half I was taking it, I was feeling all the wonderful benefits on just one capsule a day. So if you're feeling the benefits and it's working for you at one a day, stay at one a day,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
If you have low levels, or for me, what kicked in was menopause. Menopause kicked in, and I'm like, oh, crud, like, great, I have tennis elbow, and I don't even play tennis. I'm like, all of a sudden, I have joint pain, and my hips are, and my hair is getting like, what's going on? So I moved up to 2 capsules a day when that happened in my life, and it provided extraordinary benefits. I feel like I got myself to a right level, or that now I'm back down to one
Yeah,
a
that's
day.
awesome.
So
And it's not going
step
to hurt you if you take more than is needed, right?
No, yeah, we say 1 to 2 a day.
Okay.
And yeah, that there's no evidence of negative effects. It's just maybe like the gain that you
You
get
might
from
it might not
taking.
be worth the money. And yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's not, yeah, just save your money and just use the minimum amount that is effective for you.
Awesome. I'm really happy to hear we can test levels. Can you hear that, listeners? We can test your level on a NutriVal, which is awesome. Okay, what about patients who are taking fish oil? Can you take them together? Like there's no competition, like in the same mouthful, you can take it with your omega-3s. Okay, awesome. Great. You answered all my questions. So tell us, where can listeners find you and your book?
Yeah, so the book is let's see here. I have a copy of it. So the longevity nutrient is by Simon and Schuster, and it's available wherever books are sold. So Amazon or Barnes and Noble, Target, it's available there for sale. And so I hopefully it's a good adventure. hopefully, obviously it's meant to educate, increase awareness of C15, to give people a lot of tips on what are different ways beyond, supplementation
Sure.
is part of a fix, but we provide other tips as well, in addition to just general longevity and wellness, tips. And also, selfishly, I hope it inspires people who read it to be like, hey, if this nerdy dolphin veterinarian could happen upon a discovery and follow the data and to be able to, really like tap into something that you're passionate about to make a difference in the world, like we all have an ability to be able to do that, even if not even, but like whether it's coaching kids, at soccer or gardening, that just, I hope it inspires people to just follow your passions and make sure that if we're all about longevity, it's all about living a life well, and enjoying it.
Beautifully stated and beautiful cover. Your book is beautiful too.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, last final question. What is your top longevity tip?
Okay, so I think people are going to like this because I normally, most people should and would answer, exercise, because it is unquestionable. So
Mhm.
I just had to get that in there. But my personal tip is being able to provide time for yourself, that involves sleeping. So getting
Take
sleep,
a nap. Are you telling me to take a nap?
take, and there are some, like there are different genotypes that we're learning that
Yeah.
benefit from those. But for myself, I take, in most days it's getting hard, I have to admit it's getting harder, but to be able to sneak a power nap into the middle of the day, it allows my body to reset, my mind to reset. I'm still able to sleep at night because it's most important to get
Mhm.
a full night's sleep. So don't compromise that full night's sleep. But your body needs time to be able to take in what you've given it in the morning, prepare for what's going to happen in the evening, and just reset at all levels. I think we underestimate, and in fact, we feel guilty if we
Yeah.
get too much sleep. And instead, that is one of the most effective ways, along with having a healthy social life, and ensuring we protect that. And, of course, eating a healthy diet and exercise and taking fatty 15.
I'll tell my husband. He knows I like my naps, and he usually does let me get the nap. I mean, I can't during the workday, maybe one day, but
But
you'll
he's
have to listen to
probably
this. Yeah.
learned.
Oh, he
He's
knows.
probably learned
Just go
his
take your
strategy.
nap. You'll be better after.
Yeah, Eric is that way with me too. He's like, yeah, 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 go get that nap because I
Hang
know
on.
you're
Is
gonna.
your husband's name Eric? Did you just say that? So is
Yeah.
mine. We're both Stephanies with husbands named Eric. What are your children's names? Don't you get
Oh my God. Well, Ben, I have one kiddo named Ben. So
Okay,
no,
nope, nope, not the same.
okay, it stops there. That is too cute. Love it.
Well, you are inspiring. So thank you for inspiring hope around these simple discoveries that can still be made to make the world a better place. Now, I'm copying you here, okay? But this is a good ending. So I'm gonna end this how you end your TED Talk, which is what you said. And I'm gonna say this in our next team meeting too, when we talk about Fatty 15. Okay? So thanks
Right.
again for coming on the show, listeners. Please check out her book. I'll put links to Fatty 15 in the show notes. You can use code Longevity Blueprint for 15% off your first purchase. I'll put a link to your TED Talk as well. So I'm going to end this how you ended it with save the dolphins, save the world.
Thank you, Stephanie. What a pleasure.
Thanks for coming on the show.